Today on the Indo Daily, a news wrap of 2023. We're going to approach this episode of the Indo Daily slightly differently in that I'm still Kevin Doyle, but on this one occasion I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts Fionnán Sheahan, Ellen Coyne and Tabitha Monihan, and we're going to look back at some of the biggest stories that we have covered on the podcast over the past year. Fionnán, I don't think there's any doubting the story of the year. It started with a hunch or a tip-off you had in June and it's still rolling. RTÉ.
It started out as a pretty innocuous year. RTÉ were announcing their top 10 best paid stars, which always gets great airplay over the course of the year. And this was showing back in February that stars' pay was coming down across the board. Ryan Tubridy was being paid 50 grand less. And Dee Forbes, the then Director General of RTÉ, was hailing this reduction across the board. And then there was a few other things that kind of kicked in. Ryan Tubridy announced that he was going to be departing from the Late Show, so there was all the speculation about who's going to replace him, and there was a long goodbye and great tributes for him. Dee Forbes was winding up, and she was being replaced by Kevin Backhurst, who was in RTÉ previously, and that was all grand. And then in June, all these events came together when we suddenly learned that Dee Forbes was leaving a little bit early, and that was a bit curious. And then we've heard that there was some sort of investigation going on into something that happened during COVID-19, and there were payments, and there had been a big investigation by one of the biggest law firms in the country, one of the biggest accountancy firms in the country. And then it all blew up when we discovered this all related to Ryan Tubridy, RTÉ's highest paid star, and it pretty much did roll from there. So what started out as kind of a financial management and accounting issue and a corporate governance matter turned into, as you said, the drama of the year for RTÉ, which is still rolling on because you've large numbers of people now refusing to pay for their TV licence. There has been a massive clear out at the top levels of RTÉ management. And coming to the end of the year, Ryan Tubridy is gone from RTÉ completely. Dee Forbes is gone after being leaving, then being suspended, then resigning completely. We've had several other management tiers gone out, and we now have got basically a scenario where 400 less staff are going to be working in RTÉ as a result of this fallout. But in the meantime, we had spectacular drama during the summer as the fairly innocuous Oireachtas Media Committee became better than Fair City, Dallas and EastEnders all rolled into one. We had this repeated drama where RTÉ executives were coming in before Oireachtas committees and being grilled by TDs and senators who most of the public didn't have a clue who they were beforehand and suddenly became household names. So that created stars in its own right. Niamh Smith, the Fianna Fáil TD for Cavan Monihan, has ended the year as one of the most high-profile representatives. She chaired those committee meetings quite fabulously. We had comical moments involving the likes of Matthew McGrath asking,
who are you loyal to?
I'll ask again, who are you loyal to? Who are you supposed to serve?
Can I just ask one question? Who are we lying to about what?
Loyal to.
Loyal to.
Sorry.
Matthew McGrath, who I understand everything he's saying, other people have difficulty with.
That's a temporary ring.
Asking D4 executives who are you loyal to, and they're not quite understanding what it was that he was saying. We had Ryan Tubridy's own 7 hours of testimony alongside his agent Noel Kelly, where he pleaded his defence. We then had a situation where Ryan Tubridy, over the course of a dramatic 48 hours, seemed to be exonerated on half the accusations that were put against him, but was then chucked out of RTÉ completely 24 hours later because he was arguing he was wholly innocent of everything, and there was no issue with any of these payments at all. That was too much for RTÉ, and now he's moved on to other things across the water. So quite a dramatic year as a whole for RTÉ, and not really one that they will say at any level is their finest hour.
And such was the interest as well that pubs across the country were showing the Oireachtas hearings as well. So you knew people were interested in watching the drama unfold if the pubs were going to be showing it instead of the matches as well.
It had got into the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Ellen, I think it's very appropriate that you're wearing green, because this time last year I was getting complaints about you being the Christmas Grinch who was trying to destroy Toy Show the musical. People in RTÉ were very, very defensive at that stage. We now know that they lost 2 million on that.
Yeah, a vindicated Grinch, if I'm any kind of Grinch at all. Because around this time last year, we were getting rumblings that Toy Show the Musical was basically the stage adaptation of probably the most adored television event in the country. And RTÉ, for reasons we can understand, tried to capitalise on that by turning it into a stage show. But 2 weeks before opening night, we were getting rumblings that ticket sales had been underwhelming, which ended up being the understatement of the century. And we started to report on it. RTÉ were really cold. So basically, it was kind of being suggested that, this was a programme that was for the children of Ireland, and it was mainly starring a cast of children, and it was very kind of Grinchy and Scroogey to kind of be implying that it was a box office flop. And I remember at the time, because there was we were taking the view that this is probably a lot of public money has gone into this production. We probably deserve to know what profit or loss was made on it. So I put in a number of FOI requests, flatly refused by RTÉ, who cited commercial sensitivities, which is a handy one. It's often trotted out by a lot of FOI offices across the country. And then in the wake of the payment scandal, focus went back on Toy Show the Musical, and the likes of the Public Accounts Committee were kind of asking, well, let's kind of, if we're going to talk about the waste of public money or the perceived waste of public money at RTÉ, let's go back to this. Suddenly the commercial sensitivity excuse faded like snow on the ditch, and we found out that Toy Show the Musical had lost 2.2 million, had only managed to sell 11,000 tickets, and has probably affected the ability of RTÉ to ever go into the live event space again, which was supposed to be its kind of saviour, because even before the payments controversy, it had a lot of financial concerns. Its TV licence model is unsustainable. So things like Toy Show the Musical and kind of these big live events were supposed to be a massive money maker for them, but obviously hasn't worked out that way. And your heart would go out to the next producer who's tasked with doing the next big RTÉ live stage adaptation after the mess that one descended into.
Ryan Tubridy, the musical, though, would go.
I would buy tickets for that.
Yeah, that'd be a Board Gosh bestseller, full summer season.
Exactly, yeah.
To run. Tabitha, if RTÉ was the biggest story of the year in terms of how long it ran, probably the most impactful story of the year was the Dublin riots.
Yeah, definitely, and impactful would have been the word that I would have used as well. And it's so much so that even though there was two events really that happened on the 23rd of November. It was the 3 children and the creche worker who were injured in a knife attack outside Gael School Closhawera on Parnell Square. That happened, and naturally and understandably there was awful lot of emotion after that. A lot of confusion, what had happened, why it happened. It was outside a school, it was involving young children as well. The man, the alleged suspect, he was tackled by passers-by, apprehended, kept in one spot so he couldn't do anything. So there was an awful lot going on in a very short space of time. And even speaking to colleagues after who went down to cover and see what was going on, that was about 1:30 in the afternoon. By that point, there was already a lot of tension, understandably so. But it was more with a political slant. There was people coming out and it was maybe anti-immigration, political, anti-establishment anger that was happening at that time. But what happened then was that was overshadowed by what came after that. And I think by about 5 o'clock that evening, what happened was that more people started joining, about 200 people. And it became very angry, very aggressive, and then, like you said, turned into the Dublin riots. We saw Gardaí attacked. We saw the riot police out in force on the streets of Dublin. But these people, they started looting. They started setting buses and a Lewis on fire, going into Arnott's and going into Foot Locker and stealing runners. And if some people are attaching this to the far right, but I don't think any political ideology is going to be furthered by stealing runners in a Foot Locker. So you have to separate those out. So you did possibly have that far right element in the earlier stages of that day, but it definitely turned into something very different.
Of course, Tabitha, the political fallout from all of this was huge. There was a no confidence motion in Helen McEntee. Fine Gael and Sinn Féin went at it, total loggerheads over who was better for law and order. And then Ellen, Conor McGregor threatened us with running for president.
Yeah, a kind of unlikely kind of after effect of it. But at the peak of the riots, like when Dublin really, Gardaí had lost control of Dublin, Conor McGregor took to Twitter and started putting out some kind of controversial, I think some people would describe as extreme commentary. Obviously, he's a very, very high profile person. So immediately afterwards, he got a lot of attention, not just from people who would kind of be anti-immigrant or maybe on the far right in Ireland, but across the world and particularly in the US. And I think the attention proved quite captivating for him, and he seems to have wanted to try to capitalise on it. So he's making veiled and also not so veiled threats to try to enter the realm of politics, sometimes in kind of incoherent language where he seems to kind of think that he would be kind of like master of Ireland's government and we would be subjected to weekly votes to just kind of make sure that we're all still in absolute adoration of our new leader.
On Twitter, presumably.
On Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. I'd be loath to laugh because I laughed when Donald Trump first kind of suggested that he was entering politics as well. So unfortunately we know that's stranger and much worse things have happened.
Well, there was an Ireland Thinks poll, of course, for the Sunday Independent, which showed that 8% might vote for him. So for the moment, I think he's a long way off, and I'm not sure he knows how to get on the ballot paper. It's going around begging councillors in Laois and Wicklow and Leitrim to buying them dinner and asking them to give you a vote to get on the ballot. So we might be okay.
He can do the dinner. He has the pub, or he has stout and whiskey to offer.
I'd argue he's not the maddest person to run for president so
history,
far.
yeah.
Like, there have been other people who you've looked at their campaigns going, what on earth are you doing on the ballot paper?
Yeah, he couldn't make the campaign any more chaotic than some of the campaigns we've had already.
Well, speaking of the political fallout and the rows over justice this year, down the courts, it has been an incredibly busy year. We had the longest murder trial in the history of the state down the Special Criminal Court, with the monk Jerry Hutch up for the Regency Hotel attack and the murder of David Byrne. Fionnán, two remarkable things. One was that the judge ultimately said that while he believed, or they believed, the three-court judge, and it was actually three female judges at the top of the court, while they believed that the Hutch criminal gang was behind what happened in the Regency Hotel, the Gardaí, the prosecution, had not proven that the monk himself was actually there on that day and took part in it. So he walked free. That was quite extraordinary. The other one was that the biggest, or certainly the biggest headline witness at the whole thing was a former Sinn Féin councillor who basically put forward a large part of the prosecution case only for the judge to declare him a liar.
Yeah, Jerry Hutch, I mean, after the trial, so it's effectively been established in the court that there is a Hutch criminal organisation, that Jerry the Monk Hutch is at the top of that organisation, that organisation was involved in the murder that sparked the biggest gangland feud that this country has ever seen. But yet Jerry Hutch potentially was not involved in it. Indeed, the narrative that emerged from it was basically he ended up having to clean up after the event because it proved to be such an astonishing mess for members of his family and for the wider community who were then sucked into this feud. So Jerry Monk Hutch, yeah, he does walk free, but it does mean that once again he will come under ever greater scrutiny from now on in terms of his activities. It also made it quite clear as well that he's not getting costs here. The court was not saying he is a wholly innocent man of everything. They were just saying on these charges here, there wasn't sufficient evidence, which was also a good day for the Special Criminal Court, which does come under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism as a non-jury court in terms of how they assess their outcomes. In this case, they showed, no, they were actually capable of coming down and saying, no, we actually reject the prosecution claims. The Jonathan Dowdall was of enormous interest because of who he was in terms of someone who had turned on the Hutch organisation, was now giving evidence in return for going into the witness protection programme, and also because of who he was politically. He was Mary Lou MacDonald's protégé a decade ago in her Dublin Central constituency. If it wasn't for this double life that he was leading, we may well be talking about him now as a potential future minister in a Sinn Féin government. But what came across in that trial was just astonishment that this person could actually rise up through any political organisation, to be quite frank. He was not a coherent witness. He certainly wasn't credible. Nor was he charismatic. So it was difficult to see how exactly he rose up. We also learned from recorded conversations between Jonathan Dowdall and Jerry Hutch as they were travelling up to Northern Ireland to deal with dissident Republicans, that Jonathan Dowdall spoke about his time in Sinn Féin, his general, off the top of his head, political views. But he disclosed that in the run-up to the local elections where he ran as a Sinn Féin candidate in 2014, that he says he was questioned by Sinn Féin officials about his involvement in the shooting up of his uncle's house. Now, all along Sinn Féin had told us we had no inkling, to use Mary Lou MacDonald's phrases, that Jonathan Dowdall had any involvement in criminality whatsoever, and yet here he was on tape talking about this. Sinn Féin said that he brought this up, that he discussed it, that they never questioned him about such matters. So we were able to piece a timeline together. Jonathan Dowdall, a shooting at his uncle's house, Sinn Féin questioning him on it, then his subsequent election as a Sinn Féin candidate, as a councillor, then trouble within the ranks in Sinn Féin with Jonathan Dowdall torturing a man at his own home, waterboarding him, and then Jonathan Dowdall leaving Sinn Féin and politics. And there's still unanswered questions about that 2-year period, who knew what and when. So we certainly got that matter fleshed out a bit more thanks to the Special Criminal Court.
And as we saw in the recent no confidence motion over Helen McEntee, it is likely to be a political hammer, I guess, that Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil will beat Sinn Féin with for some time to come as we head into election season in 2024. I want to also ask, one of the other big court cases of the year was Molly Martin's. The family of Jason Corbett spending 2 weeks in America to see Tom and Molly Martin sent back to jail for killing him, but not for very long.
Yeah, so you had this timeline of Jason Corbett at the age of just 39 being beaten to death with a baseball bat and a concrete slab at his home in North Carolina back in 2015, and his wife and father-in-law then being convicted of that 2 years later for murder, that being overturned on appeal. Then they were coming back to court in the autumn, and a plea bargain. We'd all be familiar with plea bargain deals so much in Law and Order and so on in the American justice system, whereby the second degree murder count was dropped for effectively manslaughter was effectively the charge. So they were being effectively found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, and this was a sentencing hearing. And what it turned into was basically the Martins putting Jason Corbett, a man that they had killed, on trial, depicting him as an abuser, as a bully, as someone who was controlling and who was miserly, and basically slurs being cast upon this dead man who was in no position, obviously, to defend himself. And what we saw at the tail end of that trial was quite remarkable. His children, teenagers, Jack 19 and Sarah 17, coming to their father's defence, depicting him as a loving father who they loved dearly and who loved them very much, who was very much a part of their life. And they pushed back on Molly Martins, describing this as a travesty, depicting her as a liar, her family being compliant, she trying to weaponize them against their father, and calling her a monster. And ultimately, they did manage to reclaim their father's legacy as a result of that startling victim impact statement that they delivered in courtroom number 6 in Davidson County Court House in Lexington in North Carolina. And we saw that ultimately, the Martins were sent back to jail, albeit for a shorter time period.
Tabitha, of course, the story we thought ended there, at least, except a couple of weeks ago when they were almost let out by mistake.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary development earlier on in the month, and exactly what Fionnán said, putting Jason Corbett back on trial must have been so difficult for the family. But then for this news to come out earlier in the month, where essentially the news came out that Molly Martins and Tom Martins were going to be released. Tom would have been released on the 5th of December, and then Molly on the 6th. By all accounts, it might have been a typo, and there was an investigation launched into what exactly went on there. But what would have meant was that when there was the retrial and then they were resentenced, there was an extra 7 months added to their sentence. They would have only have served 4 weeks of that. But what is also an extraordinary detail as well is that both Tom and Molly Martins remained in county jail for the last 4 weeks. They haven't been in high security jail. Now, when they were sentenced the last time, within 24 hours they were sent to high security prison. So now, when this all came out, that was when they were moved to the high security prison. So there was an awful lot. But then again, the impact on the family, they heard through the media. So it just added to what they must have gone through throughout this whole process.
Incredibly hard year for that family. Ellen, tell me about Enoch Burke. He has spent an incredible amount of time in prison over the last year. His family have spent an incredible amount of time in court, often disrupting the court. It's one of those stories that I think a lot of people have laughed at. We've seen all the memes, we've seen all the jokes in the WhatsApp groups, but it's also an incredibly serious story and a sad story too, because he has spent a lot of time in Mountjoy jail.
Yeah, and I suppose the thing that keeps being told to Enoch, often from exasperated members of the judiciary, is that it is within his control to get out of prison. All he needs to do is vow that he will not keep returning to his former workplace, the school in Westmeath. And I suppose there's kind of a gap between the way that Enoch wants to tell this story and the way that the story is perceived. He's kind of desperate to get across that he has kind of been arrested for refusing to use the right pronouns, which is like an enduring fear amongst some conservatives and some on the right that, you know, there's this kind of liberal plot to make it illegal to not use the correct pronouns, regardless of your own personal views on trans issues. But I suppose there was kind of a very illuminating moment, I think late last year, when I think a member of the Westboro Baptist Church actually wanted to separate himself from Enoch Burke and was kind of saying that, yeah, he totally agrees with his political ideologies and the reason that this controversy started in the first place. But he kind of draws the line at being dragged out of the courts by members of the Gardaí, refusing to listen to the judiciary. And I suppose that any time Enoch or members of his family have been in court, even if they were, whether it was a disciplinary hearing at his school or it was a high court or an appeal, it has always been like a blockbuster story because they certainly never go quietly.
Fionnán, the state is in a bit of a crux here because, as Ellen outlines, this isn't actually about his refusal to use certain pronouns. It actually is to do with him being told to stay away from the school and various orders from the court. If he refuses to give in to the court orders, the only remedy they have is jail. It was previously said by a judge that he was using jail to his own ends, basically to promote his cause, so that wasn't working either. Fines, there was racking up fines in the tens of thousands, no sign of that having any impact either. It's like the state is kind of caught, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, justice needs to be seen to be done as well. I mean, if ultimately you have a judge handing down instructions to an individual to act in a particular manner, then the state has to be seen to enforce that. In the background as well, you've got a school that is trying to go about its business in Wilson's Hospital Secondary School, trying to educate kids when basically this distraction is going on at some points in the corridors of the school and at all the time right outside the gate. So extremely difficult position for everybody concerned. And as you say, people have often looked at it and thought, this is, there was even a song about it at one point. A really serious matter, and probably does draw into question, well, what exactly do you do when somebody thinks they can outmaneuver the law?
It strikes me that all the stories we've been talking about are going to go into 2024, but I think we should finish on something a little bit lighter, because it has been a very heavy year, we have to admit. Bill O'Herlihy used to have the old trick when he was presenting the football, whereby he pretended that he knew nothing about football to let Eamon Dunphy and Johnny Giles seem like the experts and get the colour out of them. So I'm not pretending. I know nothing about the last topic, and you guys are going to have to carry this for me. Tabitha, the cinema had a revival in the past year. Obviously, Ireland had a fantastic year for nominations at the Oscars, but didn't win too many. But the real story was Barbie versus Oppenheimer, and I have seen neither of them, which is why I defer to your expertise. Which was better?
Well, I only saw one, and I chose Barbie. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't go and see it in the cinema. It was just rammed at any time I tried to book a ticket, so I waited until it came out and I watched it on the TV at home. I really enjoyed it. But I think it was overhyped massively. Marketing was excellent.
Wasn't this the whole thing of after COVID, cinema was dead, we all watch Netflix and Disney at home now. This kind of thing of pitting this really heavy blockbuster movie versus this fun, silly movie, it got us all talking about it.
Definitely.
And you say you only saw Barbie, but that means you chose your side. Everybody had a side.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that I did choose the side that I did. But anyway, that's for another day. I think it was also the images of the two. It was Barbie, it was light, it was frivolous, and then Oppenheimer, which was so dark and so serious, and historical and based on a true story. And I don't know, I think it was a marketing genius that I think both films really embraced that competitiveness, and it worked out for both of them.
Ellen?
Oh, I was at an 8 a.m. screening the first day that Barbie came out in full pink. It was actually at something I regularly wear to work, but it was described as a costume by the cinema staff. I don't really know what that was about. But I absolutely loved it. I came out of it and kind of understand why men get so boring when they talk about Goodfellas, because that was me talking about Barbie for like the week afterwards. And I think it was just nice to kind of have something that... It's just nice to enjoy something in 2023 that doesn't have to have like huge critical analysis going with it. I think it's nice to kind of have like event cinema again. And I think you've seen like even with the Taylor Swift movie that came out in 2023 and the Beyonce kind of movie, I think like event cinema is actually coming back. And it's actually quite nice to watch something and not end up pausing it or going to get a pizza delivery. I think it's actually something that we kind of lost during COVID that did kind of come back in such a huge way.
But also the topic, that Barbie was. We've been talking about a year that was really serious. Having something like Barbie to just go, okay, this is chewing gum, this is going to be something enjoyable. Okay, it was Greta Gerwig and she tried her best. I don't know what you thought, but she really pushed it in terms of the self-discovery kind of storyline with Barbie. It was what it was. It was very commercial, but at the same time, you could just go in and enjoy it and know that you weren't going to be challenged for 3 hours and having to think and ponder after it. I think that's what a lot of people needed this year.
Fionnán, is it going to be 3-0 for Barbie?
No, I was at an 8 p.m. screening of Oppenheimer in a fedora hat with a cigarette and a full suit and tie. The remarkable thing is that while I would appreciate the historical context of World War II and the moral conundrums that Oppenheimer's story threw up, actually what's had the greater social impact has been Barbie, because there have been opinion polls over recent months that people now have a greater understanding of women in the workplace, that a woman's search for identity and so on. So you would have thought a war movie that presents that moral question mark in your head in the current climate of Russia, China, the re-emergence of Cold Wars and so on and so forth. You think, oh, that'll be the one that'll resonate with people. But actually, no, it was the nice fluffy pink movie.
Well, that was 2023. Well, actually, it was really only a fraction of 2023. But we have been your hosts of the Indo Daily. Thank you, Fionnán, Ellen and Tabitha. 2023 has been a tough year. War raged, tragedy struck, and as a country we sometimes struggle to figure out what's next. Of course, some things stayed the same. We did rubbish at the Eurovision, but on the international stage, our musicians were still top as U2 reinvented concerts in Las Vegas. We did rubbish at the Rugby World Cup, but we won the Grand Slam and the Six Nations, and on paper we're in recession, but in reality the economy is powering ahead. As we continued to adjust to a post-Brexit, post-Boris world, Michael D. Higgins and Leo Varadkar became the first president and Taoiseach to attend a coronation. And it all went really well until Leo's partner Matt Barrett started making some risque jokes on Instagram. There were rumours that the newly crowned King Charles might come for a visit. That didn't materialise, but the teetotal Joe Biden did and took part in a bit of a pub crawl around Ireland. Perhaps drunk on enthusiasm, he ended up shouting Mayo for Sam from a podium in Ballina. It didn't work, and Dublin were back on top in the football, while Limerick were hurling kings again. In politics, the rise of Sinn Féin continued, while the Social Democrats put Holly Cairns front and centre. It was the scenes outside Leinster House, though, that grabbed the most headlines, as the far right forced their way onto the agenda, bringing a noose to the Dáil as part of a nasty protest. And it was a year of difficult court cases, none more so than the trial for Aisling Murphy's murder, where Joseph Puska was eventually convicted after forcing her family to sit through an 18-day trial. Storms Agnes, Babette and Kieran made their impact, but it was Debbie who inflicted the most damage, as experts warned we're now seeing the tangible effects of the climate emergency. Irish movie stars dominated the red carpet at the Oscars, with 14 nominations, including for the Banshees of Inisherin and An Colleen Kuhn. Our big names all left empty-handed, but a star was born when James Martin celebrated his birthday with a statue for the short film An Irish Goodbye. The Rose of Tralee got a female host, with Catherine Thomas taking to the stage alongside Daithí O'Shea. And women's sport got its day in the sun too, as our footballers made a first World Cup appearance, and Katie Taylor found her form again to become the undisputed world champion. As Russia's war on Ukraine continued, the numbers forced to seek refuge here surpassed 100,000, and then another war erupted in the Middle East. October 7 will go down in history as a day of horror, when Hamas murdered, raped and kidnapped Israelis, and in response, Israel started a campaign to wipe out the terrorist group. But many, including Irish politicians, felt the civilian death toll in Gaza was too much. And then there were the goodbyes. The Irish music industry seemed to suffer more than most in 2023, as Christy Dignam, Sinead O'Connor and Shane McGowan left the stage. But it was clear from the public outpouring that they also left their mark on Ireland. One of the stranger stories of the year was the Wexford cocaine boat, when a small trawler wedged off a sandbank on the east coast led Gardaí to find €157 million of cocaine on a mothership near Cork. We covered them all here on the Indo Daily, and you've listened. So from our studio here on Talbot Street to wherever you get your podcasts, thank you, and let's hope that 2024 will be the year that we've all been waiting for.